The current educational documentary is prepared with an aim of creating awareness, imparting in depth insight into challenges and concerns related to child abuse. The documentary makers have put in efforts to make and keep its nature to be educational for masses in the society. Viewers are requested not to forward link of the documentary on any social handle, precisely Facebook, Twitter, WhatsApp, Telegram, and so on. The content generated is purely education based and not for publicity. The documentary does not contribute to any religion, political, communal, and law enforcement attribute of the society. It is purely an education based information on the said topic. It is based on the research and findings of the researchers who refrain from any blame, stigma, sentiments to any section of the society. The documentary makers shall not be liable in any manner to any person for any mistake or error in this work or for any action taken or omitted to be taken or advice rendered or accepted on the basis of this work. Child maltreatment as a social problem includes child abuse and child neglect. The US Department of Health and Human Services records over 1 million children as victims of maltreatment annually. So, child abuse is basically any behavior that harms a child, and this is often found in forms of physical, sexual, and emotional abuse, neglect, and exploitation. Child maltreatment extends across class, culture, ethnicity, and nationality. Children from birth to 3 years of age are most at risk of being victims of reported child abuse and neglect. Causes of child maltreatment are varied. There is likely no single cause. We shall now look into some definitions pertaining to child sexual abuse. The definitions in this category vary across legal, clinical, and research contexts. Sexual abuse is commonly defined as sexual acts between a youth and an older person, example, by 5 years or more, in which the dominance of the older person is used to exploit or coerce the youth. Victims are identified via child self-disclosure, medical or physical evidence, for example, trauma, sexually transmitted diseases, behavioral and emotional changes that prompt an inquiry and investigations stemming from assault of other youths. Careful forensic interviews are often important for documenting abuse, protecting children, and successfully prosecuting perpetrators. Child sexual abuse is surprisingly difficult to define as no universally accepted criteria have been identified. Definitions generally consider the sexual behaviors involved and the ages of the victim and the perpetrator. If the perpetrator is a family member, including distant relations, in-laws and step relations, then the abuse is considered intrafamilial sexual abuse. If the perpetrator is not a family member by marriage or blood, then it is usually considered extrafamilial. Neglect is the most common form of confirmed child maltreatment, comprising more than 60% of all cases, followed by physical abuse, that is 18%, sexual abuse 10%, and psychological or emotional abuse, that is 7%. Defining child maltreatment is sometimes controversial, but generally, neglect is an act of omission, a caretaker's failure to provide basic necessities such as food, shelter, emotional support, medical attention, education, or a safe haven from harmful situations. Although neglect is the most common child maltreatment case that comes to the attention of authorities and enters the juvenile or family court system, its perpetrators are rarely prosecuted in criminal court. A condition known as non-organic failure to thrive is often considered a type of child neglect. It refers to a condition in which an otherwise healthy baby, while under his or her parents' care, loses weight and stops growing.
Often, when we hear the word child abuse, we tend to associate it with the concept of physical violence directed towards a child. But the definition and extent of child abuse includes any form of maltreatment by an adult which is both brutal and threatening for the child. We also need to dispose of the myth that most child abusers are strangers. It is important to demarcate the boundaries between various forms of child abuse. Child abuse can be distinguished into 4 types, including physical abuse, emotional or psychological abuse, child sexual abuse, and neglect. All 4 types of abuse to a child are typically found to occur in combination rather than alone. We will now look into the types of child abuse in more detail. The first type of child abuse which comes to our mind is the physical abuse of a child. Physical abuse is the non-accidental physical injury that is inflicted upon the child by any parent or other person. Such injury is considered as abuse regardless of the intention for causing physical harm. Physically abused children can often be recognized by the types of injuries on their body, like bruises and burns, or when a child wears inappropriate clothing, which may include wearing long sleeves in summer to hide his physical injuries, or when a child talks about his injuries in an unconvincing manner and has no proper explanation for it. Other examples of physical abuse include shaking, throwing, or hitting a child unnecessarily, pinching or slapping a child, or suffocating and burning his skin. Emotional and psychological abuse. This happens when a person intentionally interferes with a child's mental health or social development by constantly saying things that harms his self-worth and conveys to the child that they are inadequate, worthless, and not valued. This type of abuse is invisible, but it has more long-lasting and negative psychiatric effects than other forms of abuse. A child is emotionally abused when he is not allowed to express his views, when he or she becomes a target of emotional blackmailing, facing constant shouting and yelling by near ones, or never being appreciated. Child sexual abuse. It can be defined as any act that forces a child into participating in sexual activities. If a child is forced or invited to participate in any activity that causes the other to be aroused, even if the child is not touched or does not understand what is happening, it is considered as sexual abuse. Signs in a child that may indicate sexual abuse may include shying away from a particular person, having sexual knowledge beyond their age, or avoidance of things related to sexuality. Other examples of sexual abuse include fondling of a child inappropriately, exposing children to adult sexuality by flashing or showing pornographic videos to the child, or forcing a child to undress for the sexual gratification of the abuser. Child neglect. It is the common type of child abuse. As per the Child Welfare Information Gateway, more children suffer from neglect than from physical and sexual abuse combined. Child neglect is when a parent or a guardian persistently fails to fulfill the basic needs of the child. Neglect can be physical, such as failure to provide food or shelter. It can be educational, wherein the child is deprived of the primary education. It can be emotional, such as inattention to child's emotional care, or even medical neglect, in which the parents fail to give necessary medical treatment to the child. Sometimes offering support and help to the parents is also equally important to enable them to avoid abuse in the upbringing of their children.
What are the effects of child abuse? All forms of abuse and neglect have a harmful effect on children and young people. The consequences of child abuse can be for a long term. Effects can be physical, psychological, and behavioral. Some long term physical effects of abuse or neglect may occur immediately, but others can take months or years to be detected. The maltreatment a child experiences can increase the risk for specific physical health. Children who were victims of sexual abuse are more likely to contract hepatitis C and HIV. Victims exhibit behavioral difficulties even after the maltreatment ends. Some are involved into unhealthy sexual practices. Children who are maltreated are at significantly higher risk of substance use disorders. These victims in their adulthood also think that this physical abuse or neglect is an appropriate way of parenting. Child abuse can cause variety of psychological problems. Maltreatment can cause victims to feel isolated, fear, and distrust. The victim always has educational difficulties, low self-esteem, depression, and trouble forming and maintaining relationships. Children who are maltreated are also likely to be at a risk for cognitive problems, including difficulties in learning and paying attention. They may have poor mental health and emotional health, and hence they have to face anxiety and other psychotic disorders throughout their adulthood. These psychiatric disorders may include post-traumatic stress disorder, violent or aggressive behavior. Body shaming is also one of the reasons that affects the mental health. Body shaming leads to low self-esteem and low self-confidence, and they may have to pay the price for this by professional or personal failures. The person who is body shamed might believe their remarks about their body which may affect them in ways where their confidence is shattered. They may get into social isolation. Constant negative remarks may make people anxious to that extent that they suffer from panic attacks and depression phases. For some people, it may lead to eating disorders. Often, the survivors of sexual abuse experience guilt, shame, and self blame. Some research show that the survivors frequently take personal responsibility for the abuse. This leads to learned helplessness. People who struggle with learned helplessness blame themselves for everything. They struggle as a result of low self esteem. They give up most of the time, assuming any efforts put forth on their part will be futile. They may be fearful that others will judge them for not being good enough. They feel they have no control over the situations and surrounding. This leaves the person struggling with guilt and panic attacks. But what personality do these victims have? These victims either fall in the traits of neuroticism or extraversion. Some may show violent and aggressive behaviors in certain situations, while some may respond calmly. These victims in their adulthood are most likely to be an introvert.
Definitional challenges contribute to the difficulty in accurately identifying the incidence and prevalence of sexual abuse. Records from Child Protective Services agencies in the United States in recent years indicate that approximately 1.2 children per thousand experience sexual abuse each year. This is an underestimate because it reflects only cases known to relevant agencies, and many instances of abuse are not identified or reported. Overall, the number of cases of sexual abuse substantiated by Child Protective Service agencies dropped by approximately 40% during the 1990s. This is likely due to a combination of factors, including increasing conservatism on what is substantiated as abuse, exclusion of cases that do not involve caretakers, changes in data collection methods, less reporting due to concerns about backlash, and possibly a real decline in incidence. Although sexual abuse occurs across all income levels and racial, cultural, and ethnic groups, it is more commonly reported among families of lower socio-economic status. Children of all ages are victimized, with risk of sexual abuse increasing around age 10. Girls are significantly more likely to experience sexual abuse than boys. In addition, children with physical or cognitive disabilities appear to be at increased risk.
Statistic of child abuse cases in India. According to the recently released NCRB data, 32,608 cases were reported in 2017, while 39,827 cases were reported in 2018 under the Protection of Children from Sexual Offences Act. As many as 109 children were sexually abused every day in India in 2018. According to the data by NCRB, which showed 22% jump in such cases from the previous year. As many as 21,605 child rapes were recorded in 2018, which included 21,401 rapes of girls and 204 of boys. Highest number of child rapes were recorded in Maharashtra at 2,832, followed by Uttar Pradesh at 2,023 and Tamil Nadu at 1,457. In 2017, 1,29,000 and 32 cases of crime against children were recorded. In 2018, 1,41,764 cases of crime against children were recorded. In percentage terms, major crime against children during 2018 were kidnapping and abduction, which accounted for 44.2%. The statewide segregation of crimes against children reveals Uttar Pradesh, Madhya Pradesh, Maharashtra, Delhi, and Bihar accounted for 51% of all crimes in the country, while Uttar Pradesh tops the list with 19,936 recorded crime against children, that is 14% of total crime. Madhya Pradesh and Maharashtra are the close second and third with 18,992 and 18,892 crimes registered respectively. Joshua Vian is the 26-year-old dad of a little girl who was born in early June, a baby who was just 3 weeks old when, according to the charges against him, Joshua committed the bizarre and horrifying acts of abuse he inflicted on his own new baby. And Joshua had no reason to hurt the baby other than a strange urge that for some reason he chose to act upon. According to a news report, Vian and his wife Amanda, who were married last year, spent the day on June 30 at Summerfest. According to a criminal complaint against him, Joshua woke up on July 1st with a hangover and a bizarre urge. He later told investigators he had an overwhelming compulsion to squeeze the baby tightly, but not tightly as in a comforting parental hug. Wayne squeezed his helpless infant daughter so hard that her face turned red and her eyes became bloodshot. The violent squeezing also broke the tiny baby's ribs in several places, but that wasn't the last of the Joshua's frightening urges. He next had an urge to force his index finger as far down the baby's throat as he could. So, the young dad committed that horrifying violation against his own child as well. The complaint against Joshua, which was also stated that the baby's genital area displayed bruising, says that Joshua told the police after he was arrested on July 2nd that he had experienced the urges for years, but in the past 2 years the urges have intensified. It appears that after he fathered his own child, he acted on his urges. Joshua has been charged with several child abuse charges, including intentionally causing great bodily harm to a child, abuse with the high probability of causing great harm, and intentionally causing harm. He was held on $150,000 bail. But one mental health expert says the sickening case could have been stopped before the child was forced to suffer. She told that Joshua or anyone experiencing such disturbing thoughts should have called group's parenting hotline before acting the urges. The criminal complaint made no mention of any documented mental health issues experienced by Joshua.
Because of the covert and coercive nature of sexual abuse and the frequent absence of physical evidence, a child's self-disclosure is the primary means of identifying an abusive situation. When children do disclose sexual abuse, they are most likely to tell a parent, usually their mother. Research has identified numerous factors that inhibit disclosure. Perpetrators often use manipulative and coercive methods to maintain their victims' compliance and silence. Children may be embarrassed, concerned about retaliation from the perpetrator or others, or worried about being blamed or punished. Unfortunately, such worries are often justified in that disclosures are sometimes met with disbelief and family upheaval. Boys are less likely to disclose due to concerns about being stigmatized if the abuse was perpetrated by a male, and they may not perceive sexual acts with older girls or women as abusive. Children are more likely to disclose if the abuse was perpetrated by a stranger. Other children are more likely to purposefully disclose, that is, seek out someone to disclose to, while younger children may be more likely to disclose after questioning. Medical or physical evidence sometimes leads to identification of sexual abuse. This may include trauma to the genitals or mouth, genital or rectal bleeding, sexually transmitted diseases, pregnancy, and complaints of discomfort in the genital or rectal area. In most cases, there are no physical indications of the abuse. However, positive medical findings are valuable for substantiation of an abusive act. Sometimes there are significant behavioral or emotional changes that might provide an indication that something has happened. For example, a child might suddenly withdraw or act out, show signs of sexualized behavior, or avoid individuals or settings, and this might prompt questioning or investigation. At other times, abuse may be discovered as a result of an ongoing investigation of other victims, as perpetrators commonly have multiple victims. Once abuse is suspected, it is common to conduct a forensic interview with the potential victim. These interviews are important for protecting children and successfully prosecuting perpetrators, and it is also important that falsely accused individuals are exonerated. A number of techniques are used in forensic interviews with varying degrees of documented support. It is considered acceptable to gather information about the allegation before a forensic interview, though knowledge of allegations can increase interviewer bias and result in leading questions, and allegation blind interviews can lead to higher rates of disclosure than allegation informed interviews. Assessing understanding of the difference between the truth and a lie and the consequence of lying is valuable before questioning. Open-ended questions increase the length and accuracy of responses with school-age children and adolescents. Cognitive interview techniques can also be useful, especially with older children, including recalling the event as a detailed narrative, reporting every detail of what happened, recalling the event in different sequences, and describing the event from other people's perspectives. A relatively new approach to forensic interviews is the structured interview. The advantages of structured interviews are that they need limited training, use flexible and easy to follow protocols, and have been developed for alleged victims as well as their parents. Research has shown their utility in decreasing leading questions, increasing open-ended questions, and increasing the quality of the details elicited. Another new approach is extended forensic evaluation, in which multiple interviews are conducted to allow the child to disclose over time in a non-threatening environment. it is recommended that interviewers be graduate level mental health professionals with training in sexual abuse, child development, and court testimony. Stages of evaluation include gathering background information, abuse specific questioning, and review and clarification. Approximately half the substantiated cases result in criminal charges for the perpetrator, but only about half of those go through prosecution. Because only a small portion of cases actually proceed to trial, only a very small percentage of youths actually testify. The often long delays in long court proceedings can be frustrating for families and delay recovery because of the continued need to face the situation in what can be challenging and stressful circumstances. Fortunately, participation in such legal proceedings does not appear to regularly lead to longer term adjustment problems, and for some children and families, participation has positive benefits, example, feelings of closure. In response to the stressors caused by the court process, as well as the need for child witnesses to participate appropriately during proceedings, court preparation programs are increasingly available for sexually abused youths. The goals of court preparation include making the experience less stressful, helping the child understand the proceedings, improving the child's ability to participate accurately and truthfully, and increasing the likelihood that the child will be seen as a credible witness. Court preparation procedures familiarize children with court participants, processes, and terms, inform children of their rights and obligations and the arrangements of the courtroom, and teach stress management strategies such as deep breathing and desensitization. Although not well established by research, court preparation programs are believed by prosecutors to be effective, and families and professionals working with the children find them useful. In addition to preparation programs, courts have implemented other practices to help protect children, including vertical prosecution, where one prosecutor deals with the case from investigation through trial and keeps in regular contact with the child and its family. Victim advocates also provide support and information throughout the often long, complicated process. Courts have allowed modifications to make testifying less stressful and aid in gaining attention and participation. For example, some courts allow a child to hold a teddy bear or a doll while testifying to help the child feel comfortable. Seat the child in a less intimidating location within the courtroom.
As we all know, child abuse is one of the most devastating crimes in our society, which damages the entire life of a child. It could be physical abuse, negligence, psychological abuse, sexual abuse, exploitation, and emotional abuse. In many cases, these types of incidents are not reported due to fear and agony. The law plays an important role in making decisions regarding child abuse. The Constitution of India provides a couple of articles for the protection and well-being of children. That is, Article 15, Subdivision 3 and Article 39, Subdivision F. Article 15, Subdivision 3 states that nothing in this article shall prevent the state from making any special provision for women and children. Article 39, Subdivision F states that the state shall, in particular, direct its policy
towards securing that children are given opportunities and facilities to develop in a healthy manner and in conditions of freedom and dignity, and that childhood and youth are protected against exploitation and against moral and material abandonment. In recent years, child abuse laws have been enhanced to provide more protection to children. There are laws where third parties can also come forward with a knowledge of any abusive acts. Though there are many laws enacted under child abuse like POSCO, statistics reveal that at least 1 in every 5 boys and 1 in every 4 girls are sexually abused, usually by their close relatives while they are minors, which is not reported. The Indian Penal Code has several sections under it that is related to child abuse. Section 305, Abetment of Suicide of Child. It says that if any person under the age of 18 commits suicide, whoever responsible for the abetments shall be punished under this section. Section 317, Exposure and Abandonment of Child under 12 years by parents or person having care of it. This means that if the father or mother of the child less than 12 years of age shall expose the child or leave the child in any place with the intention of abandonment shall be punished with imprisonment. Section 361, Kidnapping from Lawful Guardianship. Section 363A is kidnapping or maiming a minor for purposes of begging. That is, whoever kidnaps or forces a minor to be employed for the purpose of begging shall be punished under this section. India has signed a number of international documents and declarations that exist in favor to the rights of children. The Government of India in 2005 has accepted 2 optional protocols to the United Nations Convention on the Rights of the Child, which involves children in armed conflict and the sale of children, child prostitution and child pornography. 53% of children in India still face some kind of sexual abuse. According to the National Crime Records Bureau, there have been an extensive increase in the rape and murder of the children. Due to the growing difficulties of life and change in the socio-economic conditions, children are exposed to various new forms of abuse globally. The child abuse penalties depends on various factors like the state where the abuse took place, the age of the child, whether the offense involved sexual abuse, whether the child was physically or mentally injured, and the criminal history of the offender. Sometimes the abuse within the family can lead to major disalignment in the social relationships. In most states, child abuse cases are not given much importance or taken as a less serious case depending on the scenario. The severity of the punishments depends on the prior criminal record of the offender. In a large number of cases, sentencing can include an imprisonment up to 5 years. Other possible penalties can include lifetime requirement to register as a child sexual offender, termination of parental rights, criminal record, supervised access to the child. Child abuse is a very serious crime that can not only result in criminal or civil punishments but also can lead to social debarring and loss of respect. It may be difficult to apply state laws in each situation where any child who faces such abuses shall consult qualified attorney as soon as the crime takes place. Only an experienced criminal defense attorney is qualified to give a legal advice about the child abuse cases.
It is important that professionals report suspected child maltreatment. This commonly includes physicians, nurses, psychologists, social workers, teachers, daycare workers, and law enforcement personnel. Any person may report, and many state statutes require all persons to report suspicions, though many individuals are unlikely to be aware of this responsibility. Generally, mandatory reporting statutes indicate that a report is required when there is a reasonable cause to believe that a child has been subjected to abuse or is being exposed to conditions that could result in abuse. Reports can be made via child protective services or law enforcement agencies, and 24-hour reporting is available in most states via a toll-free hotline phone number. Failing to report can lead to criminal penalties or civil liabilities, as well as professional, ethical, and malpractice complaints. The mandatory reporting requirement overrides professional confidentiality requirements. Despite the mandatory reporting statutes, numerous studies indicate that many instances of abuse do not get reported by professionals, either because they do not recognize the situation as abusive or because they choose not to report. Research suggests that a variety of factors can influence reporting, including the perceived severity of the situation, prior success with reporting, and concerns about disrupting a therapeutic relationship. Sexual abuse can affect the entire family system, and non-offending parents and siblings may need support for dealing with this experience. Parents report increased strain on parent-child and spousal relationships, anger, depression, and post-traumatic stress. Siblings may experience emotional distress, including fear, helplessness, shame, guilt, anger, and resentment toward the victim. The treatment for sexual abuse is unique in that children are generally referred for services because they have experienced the event of sexual abuse, not because of specific emotional or behavioral symptoms they are exhibiting. Many children receive services because of parental concerns about damage to their child and for prevention of future difficulties and re-victimization. Thus, children in treatment are a very heterogeneous group. Interventions range from brief psychoeducation and crisis intervention to short-term abuse-focused treatments to more comprehensive and longer-term interventions. The general findings are that the interventions, often based on research for treating other child difficulties, are effective for treating the symptoms exhibited by sexually abused youths. Psychological assistance at the time of disclosure is designed to assess the child and its family's needs to provide support, psychoeducation, short-term training in effective coping strategies. Crisis intervention services can improve parents' effectiveness in providing support and helping their child and family address the complex abuse-related impacts and issues. Additionally, referrals for longer-term mental health services can be made if needed. It has been routine to provide asymptomatic children with treatment, especially psychoeducation, to provide development of problems and reduce the risk of re-victimization. Abuse-specific therapy designed to decrease traumatic related symptomology is the most extensively researched treatment and tends to use cognitive behavioral procedures to target symptoms of post-traumatic distress. For example, anxiety and avoidance are targeted with relaxation training, desensitization and exposure, and cognitive restructuring. Behavioral problems are addressed with behavior management techniques. Some young people also need intervention for sexual behavior problems to address parental supervision, education, communication, self-control, and sexual behavior rules. Group therapy can offer opportunities not available in individual or family therapy. It provides the victims the opportunity to share experiences and feelings with other youths who have had similar experiences, helps them reduce their sense of isolation and stigma, and provides them with a safe setting to discuss and experiment with new behaviors, including social skills and coping and problem solving strategies. Research suggests that group interventions can be valuable for reducing problems of anxiety, depression, fear, and sexual behaviors, and for increasing self-esteem. Research also indicates the importance of therapeutic services for non-offending parents and non-abused siblings. Treatment for non-offending parents is important to address parental distress, parental reactions, and supportive recovery of the abused child. Non-abused siblings may need services to address emotional distress involving feelings of relief, guilt, anger, and resentment, as well as for preventing future abuse and learning coping skills. Group treatments can be beneficial to parents and siblings by providing an atmosphere to give and receive support, share similar experiences, and resolve stressful issues.
The role of forensic medical examination is of major importance in the investigation of child abuse cases. The protection of the sexually abused child from any additional emotional trauma during the physical examination is of great importance. The physical examination includes inspection of the whole body with special attention to the mouth, breasts, genital areas. In some assaults, restraining force is severe enough to leave fingernails and other bruises on the limbs or strangling marks on the neck. Trauma to breast, inner thigh, or other paragenital areas is quite frequent. Bite marks are common in sexual assaults, and the forensic experts photographs them carefully to allow matching or exclusion of the teeth of the alleged assailant. The next concern for the physical examiner is the collection of biological evidence, provided that the sexual abuse has occurred within the last 72 hours. The pregnancy test is also performed in each case of a girl in reproductive age. The child's disclosure is often the most important piece of information in determining the abuse. While interviewing the victim, the interviewer must empathize, have patience, be calm, sensitive, and warm in rapport building and effective communication with the child. Generally, the forensic psychologists do not wear a lab coat or other hospital suit. Such apparel may frighten young children. The interview is conducted with the child alone. Apparently, during the interview, children get to know why they have been brought to the forensic psychologist and respond to what happened to them. Open-ended questions are preferred to ask during the interview. Evidently, the child's statement is recorded in its direct speech. Documentation of questions and responses is done carefully. A brief assessment of the developmental, behavioral, mental, and emotional status is also obtained. Psychotherapy, which includes talking with a mental health professional, helps a child who has been abused to learn to trust again. It can teach them about normal behavior, conflict management, and boost their self esteem. Several different types of therapy may be effective, such as trauma focused cognitive behavioral therapy. It helps a child who has been abused to better manage their distressing feelings and to deal with trauma related memories. Child parent psychotherapy. This treatment focuses on improving the parent child relationship and on building a stronger attachment between the two. In certain cases, children who go through these abuses decide to remain silent. What can we do to make them step up and share what they have gone through or experienced? Here's what we can do. Encourage the child to tell you what happened. Remind the child that he or she isn't responsible for the abuse. Offer comfort. Share the incident with someone who is understanding so that they may help. Help the child remain safe.
How should society act to prevent and deter child maltreatment? Characteristics of the child, the abuser, and the family, as well as the broader social context in which the abuse takes place, all play a role in causing child maltreatment. Thus, prevention efforts must take each of these factors into consideration. A host of interventions and changes are needed at the individual and societal levels to prevent child maltreatment. One obvious and effective societal level strategy is to establish laws that make child abuse illegal. In some countries, even spanking a child is prohibited. With the current US laws, if child maltreatment is discovered and reported, it may lead to the child or family's involvement with the criminal justice system and child protective services system. Criminal court actions, which sometimes require the testimony of child victims, can stop existing abuse and prevent new maltreatment by sending perpetrators to jail and by deterring other potential perpetrators with the threat of similar prosecution. Child protective services actions against familial perpetrators can prevent further maltreatment through a range of actions, from requiring that parents attend parenting classes to temporary or even permanent removal of the child from its home, with parents and sometimes losing parental rights and the child being put into the foster care system. If a child is young and not disabled, the likelihood is increased that he or she might be adopted into a new home. Unfortunately, however, many foster care children become immersed in juvenile court, example dependency, actions and find themselves being bounced from foster home to foster home, which are sometimes themselves settings for additional abuse. Children's involvement in the legal and child welfare system, example, multiple foster care placements, repeated testimony in criminal court can have negative effects on their emotional well-being. Other laws aimed at prevention of child sexual abuse include sex offender registration and community notification laws, which require perpetrators of sexual abuse after they have finished serving their prison sentence to register publicly as sex offender everywhere they subsequently live. These laws are controversial because of civil rights issues, and there is no solid evidence that they really reduce child maltreatment. Other societal level reform strategies involve efforts to educate the public and change attitudes, behaviors, and even public policy, often through media campaigns. For example, educational media campaigns such as those aimed at teaching parents not to shake babies have also achieved some success in the effort to decrease child physical abuse. Whatever the means, the importance of preventing child maltreatment is underscored by the wide ranging costs of child maltreatment, which ripple across a broad spectrum of social structure, including the medical and health systems, the legal and correctional systems, public health services, child welfare services, and educational institutions. Given all these potential negative outcomes, some suggest that child maltreatment is one of the greatest social evils of our time, one that must be fought with a great deal of financial and human resources. Even so, as mentioned earlier, there is hope. Child maltreatment rates have begun to decline, and many victims, although not affected by their experiences, nevertheless grow up to lead productive lives as good parents and citizens. There are around more than 2.2 billion children on earth today. Despite the progress that has been made in recent years, the situation that is faced by the children of our world is still questionable. The most fundamental rights of minors are violated in most of the parts of the world even today, and even in the most economically developed countries, not all children benefit from same rights. Every child needs a safe, nurturing, fulfilling environment for their healthy upbringing. Health, the future of every child and adolescent, is vital. We need to overhaul approach to child and adolescent health upbringing to ensure that we not only look after our children today but protect the world they will inherit in the future. They also need to be taken care of unhealthy foods, overweight, obesity, that is childhood obesity. We should ensure that their voices are heard. We protect their rights and build a future that is fit for children.